For nearly a decade, Ben Napier has been a quiet giant on television. Not just in stature, though the 6 feet, 6 inches woodworker casts a long shadow, but in presence. As the co-host of HGTV's Mega Hit Hometown, he became the gentle, bearded craftsman who turned reclaimed lumber into heirlooms and old Mississippi houses into dream homes. Alongside his wife, Erin, he represented a kind of slow, sincere American revival. But a couple of years ago, fans began to notice a change. The smile was still there, but something was off. He was sitting more, lifting less. His once booming energy seemed dialed down. The internet, as it always does, began to churn. Was there a secret illness? A hidden scandal? A fracture in the fairy tale marriage? The real story, it turns out, is far more human and, in some ways, far more compelling than any rumor. What really happened to Ben Napier wasn't a single catastrophe, but a perfect storm of physical pain, public scrutiny, and the silent pressure of carrying a hometown on your shoulders. To understand the fall, you first have to understand the foundation. Ben and Erin Napier didn't stumble into fame. They were pulled into it by the gravitational force of their own authenticity. Before the cameras arrived in Laurel, Mississippi, Ben was a history major and a youth pastor, while Erin was a graphic designer. They started a small furniture business and began rehabbing old homes not for a TV deal, but because they loved their dying town. Laurel, like so many rural American hamlets, had been gutted by the exodus of manufacturing jobs. Main Street was a ghost row, but the Napiers saw bones where others saw blight. When HGTV came calling in 2015, it wasn't for a flashy flip show. It was for a love letter. Hometown premiered in 2016, and its alchemy was instant. It wasn't about square footage or resale value. It was about front porch swings, original heart pine floors, and the idea that a place could be resurrected if someone just cared enough. For the first 5 seasons, Ben was the show's physical engine. Viewers watched him swing sledgehammers, mill his own wood, and build custom dining tables that looked like they'd last a century. He was the brawn to Erin's brain, the carpenter to her artist. But the thing about being the big guy is that people forget big guys break, too. In early 2023, the whispers started. A shoulder injury. That's the official line. But anyone who has lived with chronic pain knows it's never just an injury. It's a thief. It steals sleep, patience, and the ability to do the work that defines you. For Ben, whose entire identity on the show was tied to his physicality, the man who could build anything, a deteriorating shoulder was an existential crisis. He tried to hide it. He'd shift weight to his left arm, let crew members handle the heavy lifts, and smile through the grinding ache in his right rotator cuff. But the editing bay cannot hide everything. Fans noticed he wasn't Demo-ing Walls anymore. He was directing traffic. The speculation was merciless. Was he tired of Erin? Was he drinking? Was he burned out by fame? The truth was far less dramatic, but far more painful. Ben had been battling a massive bone spur in his shoulder, a jagged little piece of calcium that was tearing into his rotator cuff every time he raised his arm. In March 2023, he went under the knife for a procedure that was more complicated than the network let on. Rotator cuff surgeries are notoriously fickle, especially for a man in his late 30s whose livelihood depends on overhead motion. The recovery wasn't weeks. It was months of immobilization, of physical therapy that felt like defeat, of watching Erin tape episodes without him. In a 2024 interview, he admitted the darkest part wasn't the pain, it was the shame. He confessed to feeling useless, a word that cuts deep for any man, but especially for one whose entire public persona is built on being the provider, the fixer, the strong one. This was the first crack in the facade. The public saw a star recovering from a routine surgery. The reality was a man wrestling with his own mortality and relevance. But the physical struggle was only half the story. Just as Ben was emerging from his sling, a different kind of storm cloud gathered over Mississippi. In 2022 and 2023, the largest public fraud scandal in state history exploded. The Mississippi welfare scandal saw nearly $80 million in federal temporary assistance for needy families (TENF) funds, money meant for the poorest citizens, diverted to projects favored by wealthy and powerful insiders. Names like Hall of Fame quarterback Brett Favre were dragged into the light. And then, buried in thousands of pages of text messages and emails, a name familiar to millions of HGTV viewers appeared: Ben Napier. The internet did what the internet does. Headlines screamed. Social media lit up with the implication of guilt. Was the wholesome woodworker part of a scheme to steal from the poor? Here is where the story demands careful attention. The truth, as it almost always is, was more nuanced than the algorithm allowed. Ben Napier was never charged with a crime. He was never a defendant. The mention of his name in the scandal documents was peripheral, relating to conversations about promoting the state or the city of Laurel, not about the diversion of welfare funds. Specifically, text messages showed that others had discussed using Ben and Aaron's celebrity to help the state's image, but there was zero evidence, none, that Ben knew about, participated in, or profited from the illegal funneling of welfare money. In fact, the Napiers have a long history of philanthropic work in Laurel, often using their own platform to raise money for local schools and historic preservation. But the court of public opinion doesn't care about nuance. For a few weeks, the "what if" hung over them like a bad smell. Ben, already physically depleted, now had to defend his character. He didn't issue fiery denials. He didn't go on attack. He did what he always does. He kept working, kept showing up, and let the silence speak. Eventually, the story moved on. But the damage was done. The armor of invincibility had been pierced. Yet if you ask the people of Laurel, the ones who live next door, not the ones who tweet, they'll tell you the real what happened moment wasn't a scandal or a surgery. It was the silent weight of success. When Hometown became an empire, it stopped being just a show. It became a mission. The Napiers launched Hometown Takeover, a spin-off where they attempt to revive entire towns. They opened a retail store, Laurel Mercantile, and a coffee shop, The Scented Leaf. They wrote books. They produced a Christmas special. Ben, the history major who wanted a quiet life of woodworking, suddenly became a CEO, a brand ambassador, and a symbol of rural revival. That is an impossible burden for any human being. In quiet moments on their podcast, The South Magazine, and in rare intimate interviews, you can hear the fatigue. Ben talks about missing the simplicity of building a single table for a neighbor. He talks about the anxiety of being a role model. He has mentioned that his daughters, Helen and May, are growing up on a film set, and that he constantly questions whether the fame is worth the loss of normalcy. The turning point, the real what happened, occurred not in an operating room or a courtroom, but in a quiet barn behind his house where he keeps his workshop. After the shoulder healed and the scandal faded, Ben had a reckoning. It wasn't televised. He realized he had become a character, TV Ben, who was always smiling, always capable, always on. The real Ben had a bad back, a repaired shoulder, and a quiet resentment for the camera crews that documented his every nail hammered. In late 2024, he made a quiet but profound change. He stopped trying to be the physical star of Hometown. He transitioned. Watch the newer seasons. You'll see him more often in the workshop, designing and teaching younger carpenters while Aaron handles the on-site chaos. He is moving from doer to mentor. He has delegated the heavy lifting to a new generation of apprentices, a decision that was met with some fan criticism. Ben doesn't work as hard anymore, but which was essential for his survival. So, what really happened to Ben Napier? He didn't die. He didn't get canceled. His marriage didn't implode. What happened is both more boring and more beautiful. He got real. He faced the limitations of his body, the cruelty of public association, and the suffocating weight of being a symbol. And he chose to get smaller in order to stay whole. He chose to be a present father over a tireless craftsman. He chose his health over the highlight reel. Today, Ben Napier is still on Hometown, but the show has changed. It's less about him saving the day with a hammer and more about the community saving itself. He has become the steady, weathered anchor rather than the roaring engine. The smile is still there, But now it carries the wisdom of a man who learned that the strongest thing you can build isn't a table or a house, it's a boundary. The lesson in Ben's story is a quiet rebellion against the culture of modern fame. In an era where influencers perform their breakdowns for clicks, Ben Napier did the unthinkable. He healed in private. He didn't write a tell-all book about his shoulder surgery or his name being dragged through a scandal. He just got better. Slowly. The next time you watch Hometown, look past the beautiful reveal of the renovated shotgun cottage or the Victorian Foursquare. Look at Ben's hands. They are no longer the hands of a man trying to prove something. They are the hands of a man who has nothing left to prove. He survived the two deadliest things that can happen to a good man in the public eye: his own body breaking down and the internet mistaking his proximity to a scandal for guilt. And he came out the other side, not as a martyr, but as a man who finally learned that the word home applies to his own body and soul, too. That is what really happened, and it's a better story than any rumor ever could be.